While my husband walked into the dining room with his hand firmly interlaced with that of his new marketing director, I noticed that the red of her dress matched the cranberry sauce I had just served. 20 years of marriage had taught me to keep my cool even when everything was falling apart. And today was no different. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Family, I have an announcement to make, Robert said, his voice carrying that overconfident tone that had won over investors for decades. Melissa isn't just a brilliant addition to our Asian expansion. She's pregnant. With a boy. At last, I'll have my heir. The silence that followed was deafening. Our twin daughters, Sarah and Jessica, froze with forks halfway to their mouths. Margaret, my mother-in-law, let out an audible sigh. Michael, Robert's brother, stared at his own plate as if searching for an answer. Only I smiled as I poured more wine for everyone. That's wonderful news, dear. I think it's the perfect moment for us to toast to the future of the Blackwood Empire. Robert stared at me, confused by my reaction. That look of surprise made every second of the 3 months I spent planning tonight worth it. It all started on a Tuesday in August. Robert was at a conference in Chicago when his assistant called our apartment, asking about documents that were supposed to be in Singapore. In his office, I found hotel receipts from Tokyo, not Chicago, and passionate text messages from Melissa. The pain was sharp but brief. In its place, a clarity I hadn't felt in years took over. In the following weeks, I became a shadow in the corporate corridors. I hired discreet investigators. I talked to our old accountants. I analyzed every contract signed since our wedding. What I found was more than just marital betrayal. It was a lifetime of misappropriation. The award-winning marketing campaigns? Those were my ideas that I presented during our dinners. The expansion strategy for emerging markets that tripled our revenue? My sketches on napkins that Robert took to board meetings? The sustainable approach that put us on the cover of Forbes? My college project that I later adapted for hospitality. But the most important thing, I discovered the wedding gift that Robert's father had given me, and that my husband never mentioned: 60% of the Class B shares of Blackwood Hospitality Group. Emily seems strangely calm, doesn't she? Jessica whispered to Sarah, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe Mommy already knew, replied Sarah, always the insightful one. Melissa adjusted her dress over her 3-month baby bump, clearly uncomfortable. Robert cleared his throat. Emily and I will talk about this privately. Today, we're celebrating Thanksgiving and the future of the company. What a coincidence you mentioning the future of the company, I said, serving myself some mashed potatoes. I was just thinking about that this morning. Did you know that Blackwood has a pretty interesting share structure? Robert froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Emily, today is not the time for corporate talk. On the contrary, dear, if we're celebrating family and business, it's the perfect moment. I picked up my folder of documents from the chair. Over the past few months, I discovered some irregularities in our corporate finances. For example, that Cayman holding registered in your personal assistant's name. Robert's face paled. Melissa looked at him in confusion. Or the overpriced contracts with the consultancy that happens to be owned by your college friend. I spread documents across the table as I spoke, but the most interesting were the monthly deposits to an account in Singapore. They started exactly when Melissa was hired. This is absurd! Robert banged on the table, making the silverware clink. You don't know what you're talking about. I built this empire. You really built it? I smiled, pulling another document from my folder. Who came up with the localized luxury experience concept that defined our brand? Who developed the loyalty system that boosted our retention by 87%? Who personally negotiated with the Thai government for our expansion in Bangkok? I did all that. In fact, those were my ideas, every single one of them. I have the original sketches, dated and attested. Margaret leaned forward. Robert, what is she talking about? She's upset, Mom. Obviously, she's having some kind of breakdown because of the situation. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I calmly got up. That must be our final guest. I thought we might need a mediator for this discussion. I opened the door to William Hartman, the retired lawyer who had drafted the company's original documents nearly 3 decades ago. "Good evening, everyone," William said as he entered the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt dinner, but Emily told me this would be a good time to clear up a few details about the ownership structure of Blackwood Group." Robert stood up so quickly he almost knocked his chair over. His eyes bounced between me and William like an animal cornered. "William, what are you doing here? You retired 5 years ago." "At your wife's request, I came to review some documents. Documents I myself prepared when your father was still running the company." William placed his leather folder on the table next to the turkey that was cooling off. "With all due respect, William," Robert tried to regain his composure, "any corporate matter should go through our current legal department. You're no longer authorized to discuss confidential company issues." "Actually," I interjected, "as the controlling shareholder, I can consult you whenever I want." Those words hung in the air like thick smoke. Margaret slowly set her fork down. "Controlling shareholder? Emily, what are you saying?" I looked around the table before fixing my gaze on Robert. "On our wedding day, your husband, Harold Thompson, called me aside for a private conversation. He handed me an envelope and said, 'Robert has business skills, but you have vision. This is my gift to ensure the Blackwood legacy stays strong.' Inside were certificates for 60% of the company's Class B shares." I opened the folder and pulled out the original certificates, preserved in special plastic. Class B shares come with multiplied voting power. In simple terms, I can override any decision Robert makes, even if he owns more common shares. Robert turned pale. "That's impossible. My father would never have done that." William opened his folder. "I have here the original shareholders' agreement, with your father's signature and yours, Robert. You signed it agreeing to this structure. On the back of page 3, there is a specific addendum naming Emily as the controller of the Class B shares, effective the day of your wedding." "I never read that. You have any idea how many documents I signed back then?" Robert's voice rose in despair. "Law doesn't recognize the defense 'I didn't read what I signed, son,'" William replied calmly. "Especially not for a CEO." Melissa, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "Robert, what does this mean for us?" "For the baby? It means nothing," Robert answered quickly. "This is some elaborate bluff. Emily hasn't exercised this so-called control for 20 years. "Because I respected what we built together," I replied. "Or at least I did until I discovered that you not only cheated on me personally, but also betrayed the very principles of our company." I got up and walked around the table. "For 3 months, I dug into the financial guts of Blackwood. I found out that you siphoned off over $15 million through overpriced contracts with shell companies. You used company money to fuel your double life. Even worse, you jeopardized our position in the Asian market by promising exclusivity to 2 competitors at the same time." "You have no proof of that," Robert tried to argue, but his voice faltered. "I've got all the evidence, and more importantly, I have the legal authority to act." I pulled another document from my folder. "This is a memorandum from the executive board, signed by me as the controlling shareholder, which calls for a full forensic audit of all operations over the past 5 years." Sarah, ever as analytical as I, recovered from her initial shock. "So you're technically Dad's boss all along?" "Legally, yes. In practice, we worked as partners. At least, that's what I thought." Michael, who always lived in his brother's shadow, finally spoke. "Harold always said there was a contingency plan in case Robert let power go to his head. I never imagined it would be you, Emily." "My husband was a shrewd man," Margaret commented, surprising everyone as she calmly sipped her wine. "He always said that Emily saw beyond the obvious." Robert shifted from shock to anger, and then to negotiation within minutes. "All right, Emily, you've made your point. I may have made a few judgment errors. We can settle this quietly like family." He shot a glance at Melissa. "I'll end this. She can be transferred to another department, maybe even another continent. Nobody needs to know about the baby." Melissa let out a sound of indignation. "Another continent? You said we'd be together, that everything would be formalized after your son was born." Things are complicated now, Melissa, Robert replied coldly. Things always were complicated, Robert, I replied. The difference now is that they're transparent, and no, we're not going to settle this quietly. I've already registered my controlling shareholder position in every exchange where we trade. The official announcement was made an hour ago. Robert completely lost his composure. You can't do this. I already did. Starting Monday, I officially take over as CEO of Blackwood Hospitality Group. William interjected in his calm voice. If you really wanted a coup, you would have called for a vote of no confidence using the evidence of your financial misdeeds. You would be fired for cause, with no severance, and likely face criminal charges. I placed a document on the table that detailed the new corporate arrangement. Instead, I'm offering you an exit that preserves your public dignity and keeps you involved where you truly add value: external relations and representation. And if I refuse, then I move forward with Plan B, a complete forensic audit, public exposure of the irregularities, and your formal dismissal. Robert looked like a man drowning, searching for any lifeline. The board will never accept you as CEO. You don't have documented executive experience. Who do you think managed the expansion into Mexico and the Caribbean while you were busy with your conferences? Who restructured our finance department after the 2008 crisis? I have 20 years of uncredited experience, and now I have the documentation to prove it. I had prepared a dossier with reports, memorandums, and emails demonstrating my involvement in the major decisions of the company over the past 2 decades. Besides, I added, I've spoken individually with each board member over the past few weeks. They are all aware of the situation and support the transition. Jessica, who had been watching everything closely, asked, And what about Melissa and our half-brother? Melissa shrank in her chair, instinctively protecting her belly with her hands. Melissa will remain as marketing director if she wishes, I replied. Her professional performance is excellent, and we separated personal issues from business at Blackwood. I turned to her directly. As for the baby, regardless of what happens between you and Robert, I have set up an educational fund. We're not going to punish a child for his father's mistakes. Melissa looked at me with a mix of confusion and relief. Why? Why would you do that? Because unlike some people at this table, I know the difference between revenge and justice, I replied. Revenge would mean destroying everything. Justice means restoring balance and integrity. I turned back to Robert. These are the documents for the formal transition. William has already reviewed them. You can sign them now or after the holiday. Either way, the change is irreversible. Robert took the papers with trembling hands. Satisfaction now? He asked, pushing the documents in my direction. It's not about satisfaction, Robert. It's about legacy, the Blackwood legacy. William gathered the signed documents, stamped them, and added his own signature as witness. Officially registered. The transition will be publicly announced on Monday, as planned. Melissa, still processing everything, asked quietly, And Singapore? Am I going to be transferred against my will? The Asian expansion remains our priority, I replied. Your work there is valuable, but the choice is yours: stay or request a transfer to any other office. And what about us? Robert asked Melissa, as if he suddenly remembered her existence. That's between you two, I replied before she could speak. But I suggest that any decision take into account the well-being of the child, not just personal convenience. Sarah and Jessica sat together on the sofa, whispering occasionally as they looked at their father with new eyes. Margaret joined William to discuss details of the transition, her experience as the founder's wife providing valuable context. Michael helped himself to whiskey at the bar, looking both troubled and relieved. Melissa was alone on the balcony, arms crossed, staring at the nighttime view of Manhattan. I grabbed 2 glasses of water and joined her. You must hate me, she said without turning around. I don't hate you, I replied, offering her a glass. You weren't the first, and knowing Robert, probably won't be the last. Melissa finally looked at me, confusion in her eyes. How can you be so calm? I'm carrying your husband's baby. My marriage was dead long before you showed up, Melissa. I stayed for convenience, for the sake of the girls, for the company. But today I realized I can no longer separate my personal life from my professional one, not when both were built on lies. She took a sip of water, studying my face. So, what happens now? What about my job? About everything? Professionally, as I said, you keep your position. Personally, I glanced in the direction where Robert was talking tensely with the girls. You'll have to decide if you want a man who dumps his responsibilities at the first sign of trouble. He said he loved me, she whispered almost to herself. He probably believes that. Robert was always good at believing his own mythology. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't make the same mistake I did, Melissa. Don't let him define your worth. Robert appeared at the balcony door, interrupting our conversation. Are you talking about me? He asked, the usual arrogance replaced by uncertainty. We're discussing the future, I replied, stepping away. I'll let you talk. Returning inside, I found my daughters waiting for me. Why did you never tell us? Jessica asked. About the control of the company, about the work you really did? Because I believed preserving your father's image was important. I believed in the partnership we had, even when it was unequal. I sat between them. It was my mistake. I should have been honest from the start. Then all those times when Dad took us to see the new hotels, bragging about how he had designed every detail. Sarah left the sentence hanging. They were my ideas, yes, but he executed many of them brilliantly. Robert was always great at execution and public relations. But that doesn't justify stealing your credit, Jessica argued, always the feistier one. No, it doesn't justify it, and that's why I'm setting things straight now. I held both of their hands. The important thing is that you understand you can demand recognition for your work. Never let anyone, especially someone who claims to love you, diminish your shine. That night, after everyone had left, I found Robert in the home office, staring out the window with a glass of cognac. The girls decided to go back to Princeton tonight, he said without turning around. My own mother went with William to finalize the transition details. Melissa is at a hotel, rethinking our relationship. He turned to me. Happy now that you caused all this destruction. I didn't destroy anything you weren't already tearing down, Robert. I just stopped the rubble from burying your father's legacy. My father, he bitterly laughed. I always knew he trusted you more than me, but giving you control of the company, that's unforgivable. He saw in me what you ignored for 2 decades, commitment to something bigger than myself. I poured a small glass of red wine. You know what's ironic? If you had really treated me as a partner, I would never have needed to take control. We would still be as before, with you in front of the cameras and me behind the scenes. Robert emptied his glass. What now? Exactly what William explained. You keep your title as chairman, focusing on strategic relationships and public representation. I take over operations, finance, and creative direction as CEO. And what about our marriage? I looked at him, surprised by the question. Do you really want to stay married after all this? 20 years, Emily, 2 daughters, a company, doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything to me. That's why seeing you walking with your pregnant girlfriend was so devastating. I set my glass on the table. But to answer your question, yes, I think our marriage is over. I'll send the divorce papers along with the new executive contract on Monday. Robert ran his hand through his graying hair. And Melissa, my son? As I said before, you can keep your relationship with her if you both want to. As for the baby, I hope he ends up with a better father than the one you were to me. The educational fund is guaranteed regardless of your actions. Why are you doing this? The fund, keeping Melissa on the team. Why not just destroy everything? Because I'm not you, Robert. I don't confuse power with cruelty. I headed toward the door, pausing before leaving. And because that child, that young life, isn't to blame for your choices. Unlike you, I know the difference between responsibility and control. 3 weeks later, I was in Blackwood's main office in New York, looking through the glass wall at the city skyline. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. The market reacted positively when we detailed the new strategic directions and the restructuring of governance. The shares went up 12% in the first week. Sarah and Jessica decided to intern at the company during the winter break, interested in learning about the true legacy they might one day inherit. Melissa accepted the transfer to Singapore, where she led our expansion with impressive skill. Robert visited her regularly, although he wasn't sure if they were trying to rebuild their relationship or just coordinating the future creation of his son. Margaret, surprisingly, became my most fervent ally, joining the board as a senior consultant. "Harold would be proud," she said during our last meeting. It was the director of our newest project in Kyoto. "Miss Thompson, the Japanese investors are impressed with the cultural integration proposal. They want to know if we can implement similar elements in other Asian markets. Tell them we are developing customized approaches for each location. We don't believe in one-size-fits-all solutions. The future of luxury hospitality lies in authentic, localized experiences, just as you predicted in last year's strategy memo." "Thank you, Takashi. And please call me Emily." After ending the call, I noticed a message from Robert. He was in Singapore with Melissa for the first detailed ultrasound. He attached an image of the baby along with a simple note. "He'll have his middle name. It's the least you could do." I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Revenge would have been easy. I could have publicly exposed Robert, ruined his reputation, and completely shut him out of the company and the family. But rebuilding required something tougher: strategic compassion. My assistant knocked lightly on the door. "The architects for the Dubai project have arrived for their presentation. Mr. Thompson is also on the video call from Asia." "Thank you, Claire. Tell them I'll be there in a minute." I put my phone away and adjusted my blazer. In the reflection of the window, I saw not only the CEO of Blackwood Hospitality Group, but also the woman who had finally found her voice after 2 decades in the background. The empire didn't crumble when the truth came out. On the contrary, it became stronger, more authentic, more aligned with the original vision that old Harold Thompson once shared with me on the day of our long-ago wedding. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. And now finally that legacy was in hands that truly valued it, not as a monument to one man's ego, but as a testament to what we can build when we lead with integrity and vision. "I'm ready," I said to my assistant as I walked toward my new reality. "Let's get started."